All right, now we have a fantastic panel session for you. They're going to talk about shared horizons, exploring opportunities and threats in shared service models. The session will navigate the delicate balance of shared service models, uncovering both the opportunities and the threats that these present. They will explore strategies for leveraging the services while safeguarding against all the potential risks. Your moderator will be Bob Gordon, and his panelists are Greg Thompson, Maggie Calle, Ali Shahidi, Kush Sharma, and Bob.
We're ready. Good morning. My name is Bob Gordon, and I'm the Strategic Advisor at the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange, or CCTX for short. Kelly, thanks for doing a great way to kick us off for this morning. You really set the stage well, I think, for what we're going to be talking about. I don't know about you, but I was here yesterday, and I left at the end of the day really energized. I mean, speaker after speaker was talking about all the challenges and the opportunities that we all face as CISOs within our respective communities. I mean, one of the things we saw throughout the day was how technology is both enabling the security community and our business colleagues, while at the same time, some of that technology is also posing a risk to us. AI was a constant theme throughout the day. So was the talent shortage. And the constant theme that started right from the very first speaker, went all the way through the day, was collaboration. And I think all of that provides an excellent. We're going to explore how the use of a shared services model can help us with these challenges and the opportunities, all of which were identified to us yesterday. One of the things we'll talk about are what are some of the basic things you want to be thinking about and doing when you start to consider a shared service model. But before I start, I'd like to do a very quick survey. How many of you are using or have used a shared service model? I see a few hands out there and on the panel, which is always very good. The other thing is, how many of you considered it but decided not to do it? Well, there's a couple out there. Well, using a shared service model is actually, from a federal government standpoint, is recognized a great thing to do. They spend just over $2 billion a year on their shared services model. Now, I was thinking of asking another survey question, which was how many of you can match what the federal government is saying, but I think I probably already know the answer to that, so we'll skip on to that. So let's get into it. What I'd like to do is have each of our panelists introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what are your responsibilities. Start with Greg.
Hi, I'm Greg Thompson. I'm the Vice President and CISO for Manulife Financial. I have a unique CISO function amongst my peers in the industry in that I don't run operations. I actually report into the risk function. And so my role, kind of broadly speaking, is to develop our cybersecurity strategy and ensure that it gets implemented across the enterprise. I partner really closely with my operational peers. I've tried to make it clear with them that I'm not their adversary. In fact, I'm a co-conspirator with them to try and get the right things done at the right time. And delighted to be here, Bob, to talk about kind of broadly shared services, because to me it's kind of a loaded term.
Maggie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. My name is Maggie, and my current role is the Chief Information Security Officer at Varicent, which is a technology organization. My role encompasses strategies, roadmaps, execution. I'm in charge of the security for the cloud security, the corporate security, endpoint security, and as well, I'm also in charge of the operations.
Yeah. Good morning, Kush Sharma, Director of Municipal Modernization and Partnerships with MISA Ontario, former City of Toronto CISO. We represent all of the municipalities in Ontario with respect to the IT and cybersecurity function.
Ali.
Good morning, Ali Shahidi, and I have been in this domain for over 23 years, actually, all the way from technology side coming up to security and both sides of the governance and operation side. Been around in public and private sectors for many years, and been involved in many shared services models. And one of the other, I can call it achievements, I can call is the very first program that actually early 2000s that was developed for higher education. I was the father of that program for certification in information security and forensics. So that's one of the things that I have under my belt.
Great panels. I think you're all greatly positioned to be able to help us through this morning. Maggie, I'm going to start with you. Can you give us a hand trying to define, what is a shared services model, and how do they differ, for example, between shared service model, managed service models, or centralized services?
Absolutely. So in my view, and I guess based on my experience, shared service model is a customer-oriented business unit that offers services to the rest of the organization or customers even outside the organization. In terms of what a service is, it can be a security service, it can be also IT services, but since we're a panel talking about security services, I'll just focus this discussion on security services. Additionally, a shared service model is actually set up as a business. So it offers a pricing model. A pricing model can be a fixed pricing model, variable pricing model, as well I have seen a cost center allocation and a competitive service where you're actually making a profit, right? And the other question was about what's the difference with centralized services. A shared service model, I think, is really different in the fact that the business that you're serving or the customer is actually helping you to shape the service. And they have a part in it. Sometimes they help your organization to even run improvements, points of view, proofs of concepts, and things like that. Whereas on the other hand, a centralized services is really just a business unit taking into the responsibility to just run the service, but the business is not actually involved in shaping that security service that you are offering. So that's a major difference. The managed services as well, I think, is an important aspect to discuss. A managed service is always, it could be an actual security service that is being offered, but is being contracted out to a managed service provider. And in this situation, the business or the customer is actually not involved at all in the shaping of those securities services. However, the organization, the managed service provider, is trying to do economies of scale and is trying to make a profit at the lowest cost. So there is a lot of disadvantages with that because you might not always get a lot of involvement into how the service is provided to you. If you have issues with the quality, you truly are getting your service based on the contract that you sign. And you don't have really, as a customer, you don't have the ability to influence the service, other that at the end of your, perhaps it's a yearly subscription, you might only have the ability to either leave them or threaten to leave, improve the contract, the service, the SLAs, and improve through a contractual agreement. So that's my view into the differences between managed services, shared services, and centralized services.
I wonder, could you expand just a little bit on what are some of the roles and responsibilities of the various stakeholders in that model that you've described?
Yeah, I think with focusing on the shared services, I think it's really important for security professionals like ourselves to have a service orientation mindset. And what that means is that you work with your business or that are your customers, or if you're offering a service that, in this case, I guess we'll touch a little bit on the threat intelligence services that many of the organizations like CCTX offer to organizations that are external units that are serving different organizations. So in this case, the service model is really, and the responsibility is to help to shape the product or service. And when you have those responsibilities, you have to have some mechanism to do feedback, and then to also continuously build maybe a backlog that you're going to then start taking each of them and procuring service improvements on an ongoing basis. So I think, in my view, the responsibilities of the service provider, which is the service organization that is providing the services, and the customer is really aligned because they both want the best. And especially if we are an information security organization that's providing services within the organization, then we really have the best interest to help each other and shape it, and have roles and responsibilities established, documented with RACIs, for example, to ensure that everyone is happy, that you're serving your business partners, and that you're providing a product and a service so that they don't go out looking for those services outside the organization.
Thanks, Maggie. Kush, could you give us an idea, what are some of the key requirements when you start looking at this shared services model?
Yeah, no problem. I'll speak from a business perspective. It's really, you start with the governance. So centralized governance is key. When you're looking at any kind of shared service or managed service, you have to make sure there's some authority, whether it's on your side or the provider side. Second is standardized processes. So there could be standards, procedures, processes, etc. If you don't have some consistency, then that deal could fall apart. If there is, incidents or other alerts or other matters that come up with cybersecurity, they might get missed many times because there's no clear process and communication channel. Then the third kind of aspect that we have to look at is resourcing and pooling of those resources. So if you engage as a requirement with a provider, one of the things that you need to look at as a requirement is what is the resource pooling allocation that you're going to be getting from a client perspective. And many times there's shared resources, and many times shared resources are global, and that may or may not work for your organization, depending on the language, the culture, etc. So if we go down the list to the more operational item, you look at, can you scale? So some of the contracts from a legal perspective are very restrictive, and you have to really, as a CISO, get into the details, and just don't leave it to your team. Don't leave it to legal. You have to read those contracts, and they're probably 30 to 50, 60 pages long. But if you go line by line in each one of them, you have to understand what you're committing yourself to and what they're committing to. So it's very, very clear in terms of, can this actual solution that they're providing you scale with your business? And then the next kind of piece is really compliance or regulation. So a lot of times, the provider or the shared services model will not cover certain regulations. I don't know if it's privacy, cybersecurity, or even internal policies regarding cybersecurity will not be met by that shared service provider because they will try to limit their liability as much as possible. So one of the requirements there is to ensure that as much of your compliance effort and regulatory effort can be incorporated into that requirement for the contract, so that you can ensure that you're meeting your specific requirements. And lastly, from a business perspective, you have to look at continuous improvement. So typically these contracts are 1 to 3 years, the larger ones being more kind of 3 years with some options. So you need a clause in there from a requirements perspective to say, if XYZ happens, I can get out of that contract prior to the committed time frame. And if they're not improving, if they're not, let's say, going to the latest technology, or they have new processes, they're getting more efficient through automation, whatever the scenario is that you would like, and if they're not meeting that, you have to continuously review and assess.
Thank you, Kush. So we've got an idea now of sort of what this shared service model thing is. I wonder, Ali, if you can give us a hand on trying to help us with, okay, so why as an executive do I want to go with the shared services model? So what's the value proposition for me, or the cost-benefit analysis that I should be considering?
Sure. Well, as we know, we are living in a world that we already have so much shortage in the talent and resources when it comes to this cybersecurity and privacy side. And the reality is that as of today, it's about 2.5 million we are globally, we are short in resources. The reality is that to build basically SOC operation or overall security operation fully in-house is very challenging. And the reality is that it's pretty much, it has become, the turnovers are every 6 months sometimes, and very difficult to maintain such operations. The reality is that we know that even if when we bring in new talents, it takes time for them to get to know the environment, the operation, and the business side of everything. So in order to basically come up with a more stable type of operation requirements, for especially for the security side, it's better to have a shared services that we can then always have a pool of resources across the board that can, who can help with that side of the work. So it is going to reduce also the cost when it comes to the, depending on the business model, and for sure it's going to be more cost effective for all of the organizations. If you want to have a, let's say, 24/7 SOC operation for a smaller organization, if you want to do it in-house, we need at least 7 resources to do that. And of course, we know that, again, as I mentioned, it's very challenging to find the proper resources and then retain them. So the shared services model is the one that is going to pretty much solve this issue. In order to do that, we need to not just internally, because it depends on also the sector and the line of business that we are working on. It is a combination. It's a joint type of efforts between, can be the business side, either public or private sector, and outsourcing to the vendors that are able to bring in and to maintain those resources. So at the end of the day, all of these are going to help that sector or that line of business, the partners and entities who are involved in the shared services, to be able to help each other and to achieve the same goal. In order to, again, maintain the security operation a healthy way. Even though I say that, but at the same time, I repeat what I said. The challenge even with them is that they have difficulties sometimes to achieve that. So let's put it all together, and at least security has become a really complicated and complex issue, as we know. Every day we are dealing with something new. And in order to tackle this problem, it has become pretty much impossible that someone, or when I say someone, I mean an entity, be able to basically defeat and defend itself by its own. So we need that partnership between different organizations in order to tackle such a complicated and complex issue.
Thanks, Ellie. I mean, it certainly sounds like it's an attractive model from both efficiencies, cost perspective it goes through. So Greg, so let's talk about when we're starting to mature it and building out the security capabilities from a shared services model, you know, everything from MSSPs, SOCs, sharing platforms, that sort of thing. What works and what doesn't?
Yeah, I think it's a loaded question, because I think we've all seen cases in the media where it didn't work, where a third party failed or a shared service didn't deliver on the value that it was designed to deliver on. I think if I conceptually break down the shared services in my mind, just so I can understand it, we've got traditional outsourcing models where you're outsourcing a set of things that somebody can do better, maybe better economies of scale, somebody mentioned. Then you move into kind of a managed service, which is a very niche play to give you something that you might not be able to do in-house. And then there's maybe the most complex for those of us in large organizations, which is the internal shared services model, where we have an enterprise function offering services to the organization. So I'll start there in terms of understanding, you know, or talking a little bit about the success factors. My experience has been that oftentimes the shared service that is offered internally is viewed as a group that's just going to take care of things. And cybersecurity is a great example of that. If something goes bad, the CIO of a given business line will say, well, that's security's problem. not recognizing that they can't necessarily outsource that accountability to that shared service, right? So accountability, and Kush, you mentioned governance earlier. Governance, even for an internal model, is super important so that the team that's delivering that shared services knows how they're being measured, know what their measurements of success look like, and that they can set the expectation with the internal customers that they're providing the service to. So I think that governance piece is a challenging thing internally. We tend to have a little more structure around contracted third parties because we have to. Many of us are regulated, and there's a lot of things that we need to consider when we get into a third party arrangement. But certainly inside, we have complexity as it relates to delivering those services. And I'll finish that thought by just explaining that complexity piece. Typically, the shared services in a large organization, those of us who have been in the financial space can recognize this. You're typically providing a shared network service for the organization. You're probably looking at some cloud service, which is provisioning servers, et cetera, so that you're maintaining operating systems, middleware, and in some cases, databases. Then you get into the application piece, which is not a shared service, so the business line manages that part. And so if you go down the stack of everything that has to work together to create an internal service or application, there are different support functions at each one of those layers, and that complexity can drive risk and can certainly drive inefficiencies if it's not well understood. So the going in perspective when you set up a shared service is to gain some of the economies of scale that we talked about, getting things done one right way, you might hear people say, and that's a challenge in a large complex organization, especially multinationals where you've got different cultural things, you've got different service providers that might be on the other end of that. So that can be a challenge. And I'm going to double down on the governance piece on both the managed services piece and on your traditional outsourcing and maybe outsourcing 2.0, which is all the cloud stuff we're doing. I think what often doesn't get factored into the business case is that cost of governance, and that cost is increasing with increasing expectations by our regulators, by our governments, et cetera, that we need to be a little more on top of our third parties. Certainly those of us who are regulated by OSFI know that B10, the revision to B10 greatly expanded its scope, really drilled down on some of the things that we need to be doing better from a third-party management perspective. Then we start talking about fourth parties and counterparty risk and all this stuff. So I would say that, maybe I'm beating the point to death, but I feel like governance in all of its aspects is probably the most important thing you need to establish to ensure that your managed service is delivering the value that it's designed to do, and that you think about the reasons why you're going there in the first place. That could be economies of scale. That could be there's somebody providing a service you can't do in-house, and it makes more sense to go outside. It may be it's temporary. We need something quick, and let's get it going. But in all cases, how you manage that third party, how you govern and measure success, and demonstrate that is super important.
Greg, you talked about it. You're coming from a big organization, and some of the things you're talking about are the kinds of things big organizations do. It can be costly, and the governance piece you're talking about. So, how do small businesses actually deal with that sort of? They've got limited budgets, but how can they benefit in doing some of that shared activity, even down to things like sharing cyber threat information?
Well, I think all businesses, including large businesses, if I'm managing it, which I've done many times, I treat the payment of the third party as my own money. If that was my money, how would I be managing that, right? So if you think about a smaller business and you're paying a third party to deliver a service, don't just set it and forget it. Make sure they're delivering what they're supposed to be delivering. It's kind of like when you contract someone to do a renovation on your house, then you're spending your money. You want to make sure they're doing exactly what you've paid them to do, and you're getting value out of that. If they don't, then you're up in arms typically. Right? So I would say even for a small business, or I would say smaller than what I'm used to, we've seen in the healthcare space, for example, where you have multiple breaches all the time. And the typical model in healthcare that I'm familiar with is they outsource a heck of a lot of their security operations to managed services. And I don't know that they've stood up the appropriate level of governance and oversight, and they may even lack the skill to be able to do that, right? So there's some symptomatic things that need to be addressed to ensure that those arrangements are managed well.
Thanks, Greg. I mean, one of the things that you've been talking about is sort of making it basically successful. It's the governance models that are in there. Maggie, I wonder if you can walk us through some of those things. I mean, Greg sort of set it up a little bit, things to consider, but, you know, how do you make, as an organization, how do you make it a success?
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally 100% agree with Greg about
Can I-
governance. Oh,
Does your mic come on?
yeah, my mic seems
There
to
we
be
are.
gone. Can you hear me now?
There we are.
Okay.
Perfect.
I won't move now. So I absolutely agree with Greg's comments about governance. I think governance is absolutely necessary in any of these share models, whether it's internal or external to an outsourcing party. And key elements of a governance model are metrics. So metrics such as KRIs, KPIs, and I like one comment that Greg mentioned, that sometimes even internally, the business thinks that because information security is managed by the information security team, that's their problem to solve. And in a shared service model, if it's functioning properly, then you want to create all of these OKRs where the objectives and key results are actually aligned to the business objectives and key results. Then the business has a stake in the game, and they want to make sure that the objectives and key results set for that business unit that is providing the service, the shared service model, they're going to be successful. So it's in their best interest, and vice versa, right? If you have the information security team kind of work towards some of those business models, the objectives and key results, and the business enablement objectives of the business, then you have them both working together towards achieving both OKRs. The business OKR, objective and key result, and the cybersecurity OKR. So then you get a cross function there to make sure that the service, the share model is actually successful. For KRIs, I think it's important to establish KRIs because then they're a measure of something that could be of concern. If it's escalating in a level that is actually a risk exposure, then the business is going to see those metrics and they're going to realize that something needs to be done. And KPIs are always good to make sure that we measure the velocity of the service, how the actual security capability in this instance is actually executing and performing. Does it need any adjustments, improvements that can be funded, and so on. So I think those are key elements to make sure that service level agreements, right? Sometimes you kind of get into meetings and the business is like complaining about service levels, that things are not happening as fast as they want it to happen. But if you have service level agreements where you can demonstrate that the organization that is providing the shared service model is actually achieving the services within the established SLAs, then you have a backup for that discussion that it may be something else that is happening or misunderstandings versus actually measuring the service level agreements that were established and that were agreed upon.
Are you aware of any sort of frameworks that you've seen that are really good at sort of setting out or thinking through or managing your shared services model?
Right. Yes. So, there you go. Don't move. So, in terms of frameworks, it's the ITOL framework, for example, which is the Information Technology Infrastructure Library. It's one of the frameworks that I have seen used successfully in a couple of organizations where I established this service maturity model. And it really helps you because it's truly customer-oriented. It has all the metrics. It's a full framework that if you're setting something from scratch, then you can follow that and you can establish basically the end goal is the continuous improvement, right? It's continuous improvement, measuring continuous improvement. You have a service catalog. You develop your service catalog with your customers. And it's a very good framework to mature it as well because there are different maturity levels.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things several of you have spoken about is the whole governance issue on that. And I wonder, Ali, if you can sort of summarize or bring us through sort of what are the governance issues that are going to be affecting all of those who are participating in that shared service model?
Is my mic?
Yep.
Yes. I think that, as Greg mentioned and Maggie talked about it too, the biggest challenge we have is the governance part of this. And the reality is that in a shared service model, depending on the sector, depending on the line of business that we are in and all of that, especially when we have the third parties involvements in shared model that is required, that's the biggest challenge, because the reality is that if we don't have that governance figured out properly and putting it together in a framework that you referred to, then no one would be able to achieve what they are supposed to achieve. Especially when we are talking about security here. It's not just simply, let's say, technical support server or help desk type of support thing. We are dealing with confidential information. We are dealing with the IPs of the organizations. We are dealing with trade secrets. We are dealing with many different compliances that we have out there. It can be OSFI, it can be PHIPAA, it can be whatever that each one of those entities need to follow. If they are smaller organizations, actually, you mentioned the small business, the challenge with them is also is that they are usually lacking from the governance and the compliance part because they don't have the needed resources. So in order to achieve a real healthy shared service that is going to be effective, especially when it comes to the sharing the knowledge and sharing the basic supporting each other, because at the end of the day, when we talk about the security side, we are dealing with the incidents. We are dealing with the IOCs. We are dealing with the events or vulnerabilities that are needed to be fixed in an environment. At the local level, each one of those enterprises, they need to have their own also resources and talents and capabilities to do that. At the same time, even the shared model, because we don't want to create a false sense of security. That's usually what I refer to. When we think that, okay, we have a shared service, some like the idea that we say, oh, I'm moving all of my operation to the cloud side. And we are secure now, I have it. Which is not, again, that's the false sense of security. The reality is that it's not. At the end of the day, we are dealing with the third parties, their capabilities, and all of that are needed to be also considered and be a part of the governance piece of this, because they need to follow organizations, all of the compliances like OSFI in that way. So the governance is, I think, the most challenging and the most important piece in this model. Otherwise, it's going to fall apart, and it's not going to be effective.
Yeah, Bob, I would add from a public sector perspective, governance equals trust. And so you're representing the people. So all of us live in municipalities. Municipalities offer all the critical services. Many of the services are now moving into third-party hands through shared services as one model that we're seeing, because many municipalities can't afford the cost of it and afford to scale. The other model we're seeing in the public sector is shared service, but to Greg's point, it's multiple municipalities or counties getting together. So that makes the model more complex, because now you have various different legal entities, although they're in the same county, for example, they're going to a specific provider or creating their own shared services by pooling resources. So I think when we look at governance, we have to think always about trust, and we have to keep that in mind, whether it's in the public sector, right, with our citizenship, or in the private sector, internally, to Greg's point, to our stakeholders.
I mean, a really good point, and I like you bringing up sort of a different perspective than sort of the normal, I say normal, the other business on the private sector side. But it does sort of bring the question down. So we've talked about a big, small, public-private sector going through it, and the frameworks that we need around it, the governance issues. But, okay, so what actually should we be willing to put into this shared model? And what, more importantly, or as importantly, what shouldn't go into that? Ali, start off with you.
Sure. Again, as I mentioned, because we are dealing with multiple entities in here, or enterprises, third parties, vendors, and all of that. The reality is that each one of those entities, they are responsible for their own operation. They are responsible for their own data security and privacy and all of that. At the same time, the third parties that, again, because we are relying on the vendors for that, MSSPs or any type of other service provider that is going to help with that, they do have their own line of business that is might be or might not be aligned with the purpose of the organizations that they are supporting. So at the end of the day, we need to make sure that they are all aligned. Now, if you are talking about a larger scale shared service model that are going to be multiple, because I mentioned the capability is the challenge here too, because of course, MSSPs, they believe that they can handle everything, but at the same time, it might not be the case because of the, again, as I mentioned, the resourcing or scaling up and down type of situation. So we might need to have multiple third parties and vendors to partner with each other. Even the governance piece between them is the key factor here, because now we are talking about the business side that they need to share IPs and work and intelligence with each other. So those are the key factors. And even when it comes to the side of which I believe we are going to talk about it more at the same time, related to what they can share with each other. That's another problem, because what you mentioned, the municipalities, that the public sector and comparing to the private side, those are the biggest challenges that probably we are going to deal with, and we can work it out, definitely, and by putting together, but the roles and responsibilities need to be really crystal clear.
Any other comments?
Yeah, maybe I could jump in there a little bit. So your question was, what's appropriate to be put into it, like data-wise, what's appropriate to be put into a shared service, and what isn't? I would suggest that it's not actually the right question. The question should be, based on your risk assessment, what level of control and or governance do you need to manage the service in question? So, for example, a higher risk engagement would require a higher touch governance model to ensure that the risks are being well managed. And I say that because I don't think we've thought about putting a limit on what gets outsourced or what doesn't, or maybe I'm overusing the term outsourced here, but I feel like it's really about risk treatment, and do you have the risk diagnostic capabilities in-house to be able to make those value judgments on what level of oversight's required for those arrangements? So I think that's kind of the lens we put on it. And I'll double down on the risk assessment piece here, because I think where a lot of firms get risk assessments wrong is they're almost like audits, and they're treated almost as punitive to the folks that are on the other end of it, right? So if I'm in helping a business line figure out risks in any given environment, there tends to be this push and pull where they're trying to get the risk to be low. They're trying to show me that it's green, and I'm like, it doesn't matter what the risk ends up being. That's just because all it's going to do is dictate what we need to do to address it. It's not a yes or a no. It's not a gate that says it's high risk, don't move. It's a risk diagnostic capability that says, look, we've got insights here that give us information we need to be able to make better decisions and make better risk decisions going forward. So we're trying to change that narrative a little bit in-house to ensure that our risk processes aren't seen as make-work exercises. They're not checkbox exercises. They're actual risk diagnostic tools that provide insights, and we want to continue to kind of drive that narrative home with our clients and our internal clients.
Great, yeah, some really interesting things to think about there, Greg. Brings it all the way back to the beginning what we were talking about. It's that risk assessment side, and that sort of governance to go through. We've got just a little bit of time left, so let's think of the one thing that you'd like to leave the audience with that they can take away, so when they get back to their office tomorrow or this afternoon, for all you who are dedicated, you're going to go back to the office today. What's the one thing you would want them to leave with? Greg, start with you.
Wow, put me on that nut right away. Yeah, I would say don't set it and forget it. So I think there's a lot of rigor put into the upfront procurement piece as it relates to procuring a managed service, and a lot of work and effort and emotion put into the business case piece. And then once the deal is signed and we get the service going, we tend to leave it alone, right? We have to have ongoing governance. We have to have ongoing oversight. We have to assess risks constantly, because risks are not static. Certainly the threats are not static. So I feel like kind of managing your service provider as you would manage an internal employee or an internal set of employees. After all, they are part of the ecosystem now in any given organization. And what we do for a living is a team sport. So we have to maintain that. And yeah, I hope that was just one thought.
Thanks, Greg. Maggie.
Measurements, right? Establish proper measurements so that you can know if the service is performing well or not, and then establish continuous improvement services as well, so that you can improve the services continuously based on the threat landscape and based on the changing status of things.
Good point. Kush.
Yeah, I would say make sure you read the contract that you're signing. I know many leaders do not actually read it. They delegate downwards. In my experience, that can lead to some challenges. Read every single line in that contract. Make sure you negotiate really hard, because that's going to dictate everything else that the panel has mentioned today.
Good point. You sign it, you read it. Ali.
Well, what we are signing, what Kush mentioned, the reality is that at the end of the day, you are responsible for your own data, security, privacy, and all of that. No MSSP would take ownership of that if something happens. So again, goes back to what I mentioned. Don't feel that, okay, if you have it and you have shared services or MSSPs supporting you, you can wash your hands. Because at the end of the day, they are not going to be responsible, contractual even. They are not going to be on the hook. You are going to be on the hook for any incidents that might happen in your environment. It's just a matter of time for all of us. That's the reality of this world. And as Greg mentioned, because we are dealing with really not a non-static type of risks that every day they are changing. And we are dealing with ever-changing threats, threat actors and threat vectors on a daily basis. So just don't think that you are safe.
Thank you. Greg, Maggie, Kush, Ali, thank you very much. Great session this morning.
Thank you.
Excellent. This way, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.